That Thursday morning, when my son called me from 3 states away to say my daughter in law had been rushed to Mercy General and that my son was asking me, begging me, to get there before the doctors made any permanent decisions, I thought the hardest part of my day would be finding a parking spot at the airport. I was wrong. Have you ever walked into a hospital room and felt immediately, in your bones, that something in that building was being hidden from you? Not a feeling you can explain to anyone, just a cold certainty, the kind that sits in your chest like a stone you swallowed by accident. That was me, 63 years old, rolling a carry on bag through the sliding doors of Mercy General in Columbus, Ohio, at 2:30 in the afternoon, still wearing the blouse I'd had on since 6 that morning. My son Marcus had been in a car accident 4 days earlier, a bad one. A semi ran a red light on Route 40 and hit his driver's side door at 50 miles an hour. He'd been airlifted. He was alive, but barely. Traumatic brain injury, the doctor said. They use phrases like minimal responsiveness and uncertain prognosis in the same flat tone people use to read weather reports. I had driven to the airport the moment I got the call, flown standby, slept in a terminal chair, and flown again. Marcus was 41 years old. He coached Little League on Saturdays. He called me every Sunday at 7 p.m. without fail. He was the kind of man who remembered to send birthday cards 2 days early so they'd arrive on time. His wife, Bethany, had been at the hospital since the accident. She'd sent me one text. He's stable for now. You don't need to rush. I rushed anyway. When I arrived at the ICU waiting area on the 4th floor, the first thing I noticed was that Bethany wasn't there. A nurse at the station told me she had stepped out for lunch. It was nearly 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The second thing I noticed was a young woman in scrubs watching me from the doorway of a supply room. She looked maybe 28, 29, dark hair pulled back, eyes that were doing the thing eyes do when someone is trying very hard not to be obvious about the fact that they are watching you. I introduced myself at the nurse's station, showed my ID, asked about Marcus. The charge nurse, a broad-shouldered woman named Patricia, told me I could see him in 10 minutes, that visiting was limited to immediate family, and that there was paperwork being prepared that I might want to discuss with Bethany when she returned. Paperwork. I asked what kind of paperwork. Patricia looked at her screen and said, "Your son's wife has been working with his care team on next steps given his current neurological status. There's a do not resuscitate form and a directive regarding life support continuation that she'll be bringing back for review." I stood very still. I asked her to repeat that. She did. I sat down in one of the waiting room chairs and stared at the wall. Marcus was 4 days out from a traumatic brain injury. 4 days. I had read enough, stayed up enough nights reading on my phone with the brightness turned all the way down, to know that 4 days was not enough time to make any kind of permanent decision about a brain injury. Recovery timelines for TBI could stretch to weeks, months. Some people woke up after 2 weeks showing almost no prior signs of awareness. 4 days was nothing. That was when the young woman in scrubs sat down next to me. She didn't say anything at first. She just sat. Then she leaned forward slightly, elbows on her knees, and spoke very quietly without looking at me. "Are you Marcus Calloway's mother?" I told her I was. "My name is Danny," she said. "I've been on this floor for 3 days. I'm not supposed to be talking to you." I looked at her then. Her jaw was tight. Her hands were clasped together so hard her knuckles were whitening. "Then why are you?" I asked. She glanced toward the hallway. "Because I went home last night and couldn't sleep. And I came in this morning and I still couldn't stop thinking about it." "About what?" She hesitated for just a moment. Then she said, "Your son's wife has been in here 4 times in the last 2 days asking about the process for transitioning a minimally responsive patient to comfort care. She asked one of my colleagues how quickly that process could move if the family was in agreement. She mentioned that you were far away and that she was the decision maker. I felt the stone in my chest get heavier. She also," Danny continued, voice dropping even lower, "asked Dr. Harmon, the attending neurologist, whether there were circumstances under which recovery could be ruled out more definitively, more quickly. Dr. Harmon told her that without further imaging, there was no basis for that assessment. She asked him a second time the next day. I sat with that for a moment. "Danny," I said, Is my son actually in the condition they're describing? Truly minimal responsiveness? She pressed her lips together. I'm not his nurse of record. I'm not supposed to. She stopped, started again. When I've been in his room for other reasons, I've noticed him tracking movement with his eyes. Yesterday, when someone dropped a tray in the hallway, he turned his head. Those are not the behaviors of someone with no recovery potential. Those are signs. I stood up. Where is she? I said. Where is Bethany? I don't know exactly, but the paperwork, the DNR, the life support directive, she asked the hospital administrator this morning if it could be finalized today. Today, I walked to the nurse's station and told Patricia I was invoking my right as immediate family to have independent consultation with Marcus's care team before any directives were signed. I used exactly that language because I'd sat in enough PTA meetings and school board hearings in my life to know that institutional people respond to institutional language. Patricia blinked at me and said she would need to check with the administrator. Check, I said. I'll wait right here. While I waited, Danny appeared at my elbow again. There's something else, she said quietly. And this is the part I really shouldn't be telling you. I looked at her. Monday night, around 11, I was passing the family consultation room. The door wasn't fully closed. Dr. Harmon was inside with a woman. I didn't see her face, but the voice matched your daughter-in-law's. I heard her say, very clearly, that she needed the process to move before the rest of the family got involved. And I heard Dr. Harmon say, Danny paused, swallowed. He said he could make a documentation adjustment that would support an expedited determination. And she said, whatever it costs, just tell me. The room tilted slightly. I put one hand on the nurse's station counter. Did you report that? I said. I went to the charge nurse that night. She told me I might have misheard. That consultations are confidential and I should be careful about making accusations. Danny's voice was steady, but her eyes weren't nascent. I'm a traveling nurse. I'm not staff. I have no standing here. You have standing with me, I said. That was when Bethany walked out of the elevator. She was dressed better than someone who'd been keeping a hospital vigil should be. Silk blouse, hair done. She was carrying a large manila envelope. She stopped when she saw me, and in the half second before she rearranged her face into something resembling grief and relief, I saw exactly what was underneath it. Calculation. Oh, thank God, she said, crossing toward me with her arms open. I'm so glad you're here. I've been carrying all of this alone. What's in the envelope? I said. She stopped. What? The manila envelope. What's in it? She looked down at it as though she'd forgotten she was holding it. It's paperwork from the hospital. Administrative things I've been dealing with. The insurance. Is it the DNR? A pause. The doctors have explained that Marcus's prognosis. I spoke to his nurse, I said. He's tracking movement with his eyes. He turned his head at a sound yesterday. That is not a man with no recovery potential, Bethany. Her expression shifted into something I can only describe as practiced sorrow. I know how hard this is. I know you want to believe. I'm not signing anything, I said, and neither are you. Not today. She straightened. Something hardened behind her eyes. I'm his wife. I'm the legal next of kin. I have the right to make these decisions. You have that right, I agreed. And I have the right to request an independent neurological evaluation, a patient advocate review, and a formal ethics consultation before any life-altering directive is executed. I am requesting all three. Right now. I turned back to Patricia, who had been standing very still at the nurse's station during all of this. I need to speak to the hospital administrator, I said. And I need to speak to someone from your patient advocacy office. And I need someone to get Dr. Harmon out here because I have questions for him that I would like answered in front of witnesses. That last part, the part about witnesses, was the part that made Patricia finally pick up the phone. Bethany tried twice more on her way to the elevator to convince me I was making a terrible mistake, that I was letting my own grief cloud my judgment, that Marcus would not want to be kept alive in a diminished state. She said it the way people say things they have rehearsed. She said it with the cadence of someone who had been told it would work. It did not work. Dr. Harmon arrived in the consultation room looking like a man who had not slept well in several days. He was in his mid-50s, gray at the temples, and he sat across from me and the patient advocate, a calm woman named Rosa, who had appeared from somewhere in the administrative wing within 15 minutes, with the body language of a person who was trying to take up as little space as possible. I asked him directly, in front of Rosa, in front of two witnesses I had asked to stay in the room, what his clinical assessment of Marcus's current neurological status was, based solely on the medical evidence. He said the imaging from Monday showed diffuse axonal injury with some areas of preserved activity. I asked him if that was consistent with a diagnosis of no recovery potential. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said no. I asked him what documentation existed in Marcus's file regarding prognosis and whether all of it accurately reflected the clinical picture. He was quiet for longer that time. Rosa asked him to clarify. He asked if he could speak to the hospital's legal team before continuing. Rosa told him he could, but that she was noting the requests and the circumstances in her report, which would be filed within the hour. Dr. Harmon pressed his fingers against the bridge of his nose, and then very quietly, he told us that he had added a note to Marcus's file on Tuesday, a characterization of Marcus's responsiveness as absent, that was not, in his own professional judgment, fully accurate. He said he had been under pressure and had made a serious error. He did not say who had pressured him. He didn't have to. What happened over the next 72 hours moved both faster and slower than I expected. Rosa filed her report. The hospital's compliance office launched an internal review. I contacted an attorney, a healthcare attorney in Columbus that Rosa's office recommended, who filed an emergency motion to freeze any medical directives pending independent evaluation. The independent neurologist, a woman who'd driven in from Cleveland the following morning, spent 40 minutes with Marcus. She came out of his room and told me in the hallway that in her professional opinion, Marcus was showing meaningful signs of awareness and had measurable recovery potential. She said the existing characterization in his file did not reflect what she observed. She filed her own report. The police came on the second day, not because I called them, though I did, but because the hospital's legal team, once they had Rosa's report and the compliance review in front of them, called the police themselves. Institutions, I have learned, will circle the wagons until the moment they realize the wagon circle is on fire. Then they call for help very quickly. The investigation into Bethany took 3 weeks and turned up things that made my legs go unsteady when I heard them. She had taken out a $2 million life insurance policy on Marcus 14 months earlier. She had listed herself as sole beneficiary and had, when Marcus asked about it one evening, this came from a text exchange that investigators recovered from a deleted backup, told him it was just standard financial planning. She had also, the investigation found, been in a relationship with a man named Greg for at least 8 months. Greg was not from Columbus. Greg had a history in another state of financial fraud. The security footage from the hospital, the footage that showed Bethany meeting with Dr. Harmon in the family consultation room. Monday night, the footage that showed her twice entering the administrative wing with the manila envelope. The footage that showed her on the phone in the parking garage immediately after my conversation with her. All of it was preserved by the hospital's compliance office from the moment Rosa opened her review. Hospitals, it turns out, have cameras in a great many places, including hallways outside consultation rooms. As for the footage from the house, their house where Marcus and Bethany had lived for 11 years, that came from Marcus himself. Or rather, from a decision Marcus had made 11 months earlier. He had installed a home security system with interior and exterior cameras, cloud-backed, motion-activated. He told his best friend about it. His best friend, Daniel, who had driven to Columbus the moment he heard about the accident, mentioned it to the detective almost as an afterthought. The footage from the interior cameras showed things the prosecutors would later describe in very specific language in the charging documents. I won't describe them here, but I will tell you that the DA's office did not hesitate. Bethany was charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, based on communications found between her and Greg, and insurance fraud. Greg was arrested in Phoenix 2 days later. Dr. Harmon surrendered his medical license voluntarily and cooperated with investigators. He wept during his interview, from what I was told. I don't know what to do with that information. I've decided it isn't mine to process. Marcus woke up on a Wednesday, 26 days after the accident. Not all at once. It wasn't a movie moment, the eyes flying open, immediate recognition. It was gradual, the movement of a hand first, then the eyes tracking. Then on the fourth day of consciousness, a word. The word was my name. I had been sitting in the chair next to his bed, reading aloud from a novel the way the recovery specialist had suggested. Familiar voices, familiar cadence. And he said it so quietly that I thought at first I had imagined it. But I hadn't. I put the book down. I took his hand, and I told him I was there, that I had been there, that I wasn't going anywhere. There are things from those weeks that I still can't talk about without my voice doing something I prefer it not to do. The calls to my other children, the nights in the hospital chair, the moment when the attorney called to tell me the motion had been granted and no directives could be executed. That moment I stood in a hospital bathroom and cried so hard I had to sit down on the floor. Danny had transferred to a different floor by the time Marcus woke up. Traveling nurses move. That's the nature of it. But I got her contact information from Rosa before she left, and I have sent her a card every month since then. She told me once, in a text, that she'd almost talked herself out of saying anything to me. That she'd sat in her car the morning of my arrival and argued with herself for 20 minutes about whether it was her place. I'm grateful every single day that she decided it was. Marcus is in outpatient rehabilitation now. Back home in the house we made sure was sold before he was discharged. He walks with a slight list to the left that the physical therapist says will likely resolve over the next several months. He gets tired more quickly than he used to. He doesn't remember the accident. He doesn't remember the hospital, the first weeks, any of it. He asks me sometimes what happened, what exactly happened in those first days. I tell him what he needs to know, which is that people who loved him fought for him, and that the system, slow and imperfect as it is, ultimately worked. I tell him that a young woman he never met lost sleep over him. I tell him that the law moved faster than I expected once the right people were paying attention. I don't tell him everything, not yet. There are still court dates pending. There is still testimony to give. The attorneys have advised me to be careful about what I discuss publicly and with whom, and I am following their advice. But I will say this, because it is the truest thing I know how to say after everything. I almost didn't get on that second flight. I was exhausted and the gate had changed, and I was sitting in the wrong terminal, and for about 4 minutes I genuinely considered calling Marcus's doctor directly and trusting that the people on the ground had it handled. 4 minutes. I got on the flight. If you are the kind of person who has a feeling, not a fact, not proof, just a feeling, that cold stone in the chest, and someone you love is on the other side of it, please listen to that feeling. Get in the car. Get up, get on the plane. Ask the questions that make people uncomfortable. Be the person in the room who will not sit down. Not because systems are broken, though sometimes they are. Not because people are always malicious, though sometimes they are that too. But because nobody in that hospital knew Marcus the way I did. Nobody else knew that he called every Sunday at 7. Nobody else knew that he was the kind of man who sent birthday cards 2 days early. Nobody else could have walked in and said, with absolute certainty, "This is not a man who is finished. I know this man, and he is not done." You might be the only person who knows that about someone you love. That is not a small thing. That is everything. If this story stayed with you, I hope you'll share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you've ever had that feeling, the one I'm describing, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. I'll be reading every single one. I'll see you in the next story.